Right, well, you've all heard the green stone story today, and it's the story that's portrayed in Graham's book, The Green Stone. Here's the original cover of it, and in my book, The Seventh Sword. So I'm not going to talk about that. I mean, those that are on the tour tomorrow of the sites will hear us tell the story as we go along anyway. So what I want to talk about for the moment, from the first third of the lecture, is the aftermath, really. In many ways, this is what we didn't know at the time. Graham's already alluded to stuff that's been found out, but I just want to show you how this hangs together. So the first part of it is quite sensible, right? Then it will get very not sensible later on. But okay, so this is the green stone, right? I mean, believe it or not, there's not that many actual pictures of the green stone, and this is in the hand of Caroline Wise, actually, when it was brought down to London by Marion Sunderland in the early 80s, and we handed it around and some photographs were taken, and this is an image that's become iconic. Now Graham says it's made of jade. I'm not so sure if it is. I always felt that it was probably a quartz-based, silica-based substance, but who knows. But here's something that we certainly didn't know at the time, is that there is a tradition in the area of a real green stone. And I received a copy of this letter, which wasn't actually written to me. It was written by another investigator who had read my book, The Sword and the Stone, which was like an early form of the Seventh Sword, and had actually gone to the sites to try and disprove the whole green stone story. But the more he actually went around, the more he found confirmation evidence, including this letter. Now, this was written by a gentleman called W.G. Lee. And W.G. Lee lived at a place called Nafford Farm, which backs onto the Swan's Neck, the place where the green stone was found. Not the side it was found, the opposite side of the river. And what he's saying, he's actually having a go in a way, because he's saying, well, you know, if Collins and Phillips had concentrated on Harvington Hall near Kidderminster instead of Harvington Hall near Leominster, they would have found that there was a connection with a green stone there associated with some priest who was martyred as late as the 1960s, and he hid out in that place, this Harvington Hall, and that he was murdered because he wouldn't reveal, or killed because he wouldn't reveal the location of it, and that when he hid in this particular hole, there were guinea fowl put on the track so that if any of the Sheriff of Worcester's men would come, trying to find these Jesuit priests or whatever that were around, the guinea fowl would give away the fact that people were coming up the drive. That's basically what the letter says. You can see the date on it. It's 15th to the 11th, 1982. Now, firstly, the guy had it wrong, because Graham and I did go to the right, Harvington Hall. It is the one near Kidderminster. No, it's not the one near Leominster. But this was alluding to the fact that there definitely was a tradition, folklore, legends to do with the green stone in the very area of Harvington Hall, actually connecting it with Harvington Hall. Now, as the story that Graham has given you earlier, we associated the possession and guardianship and the eventual burying of the green stone with this gentleman here, who is Humphrey Packington of Harvington Hall. And next to it is his monument in Chaddersley Corbett Church, which is quite close to Harvington Hall, and I'll come back to that shortly. And there is this painting actually in Harvington that shows him with a green stone around his neck. I mean, that's the amazing thing. And he's showing it as if it's important, and this did actually become significant to us when we were looking for the green stone, when we eventually arrived at the Knight's Pole. But what this letter from W.G. Lee, now here's the other thing. When I received the copy of this letter, I thought, I've got to track this guy down, because, who knows, he might have just made up the story based on the fact that he read it in the local paper. So myself and a colleague drove up to Nafford Farm, and knocked on the door quite literally and said, is Mr. W.G. Lee there? And this elderly lady said, yeah, sure. And she sort of took us in. And there's a guy there in his 80s, blind. He had not read this story recently. He heard this story when he was a child, working on the Swan's Neck itself. Now, that in itself is incredible, but what's even more incredible is the story that he's unveiling, because the person that he's alluding to is Father John Wall. Now, he lived slightly after the time of Humphrey Packington, during the life of Humphrey Packington's daughter, whose name became Lady Mary Yate. Now, she lived in Harvington Hall, but she also had another home in Buckinghamshire when she married. And she would hide this father, this Catholic father, whenever he was in the area. And eventually he was caught and he was put to death on the day of 1679. But there was no historical connection between him and the Green Stone. But what all this was suggesting is that the Green Stone may not have been buried around the time of the Gunpowder Plot, but actually hung on in the possession of the Packington family, certainly through to the time of Lady Mary Yate, and that John Wall, the priest, knew about it and was murdered because he wouldn't reveal where the actual Green Stone was located. That was the implication. Now, just bear in mind, I'll come back to this in a minute, because this is the Swan's Neck. This is where the Green Stone was found, obviously nicely with swans swimming in the water there. And you'll see this is actually at Burlingham, which is the little village that backs onto Swan's Neck on the northern side. And there's the Swan's Neck there. It's this area here, and you can see the shape of it. This is actually, you can see this is actually on public display. And here's where Nafford Farm is, where the Lee family live. So obviously right on the edge of it. The reason for showing you this is something that Graham alluded to in his lecture, because we got onto the fact that in the year 1600, although we wrongly say 1604, I think, in our books, because we messed it up to do with publications of publication dates of when the first information came out about it, was reference to this supernova, a star that suddenly appears, this stellar nova as they called it, a new star in the constellation of Cygnus. And Johannes Kepler wrote about it in what year was it? I think it was 1606, maybe slightly later. And he talks about a stellar nova that appeared in another constellation as well, which is Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. That was in, I think, 1570 or something, or whatever, no, 1604. But the one that appeared in Cygnus was in the year 1600, which is what Graham said. Now, obviously, this is right in the time frame that we think all the activity was going on surrounding the loss and final burial of the Green Stone. And as Graham alluded to, and perhaps even others, is that the appearance of this star, particularly in the constellation of Cygnus, was seen as a sign of the coming age of enlightenment, something that would bear fruition with the spread of mathematics and science and astronomy and the foundation of the Royal Society in the later part of the 17th century. And you can actually see here in this area, there's the new star, there's a swan, and you see that cosmic influence coming down here. And this is what's known as the Invisible College. This was one of the symbols of the Rosicrucians, who were these free thinkers behind those that wanted change and wanted to bring science into the fore, so that it was taken away from being a heresy, quite literally, by the Catholic Church and, the Protestant Church to a degree as well. And in the other side, you've got Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, you've got a serpent around him, and there's the star that appears there. So both of these stars were seen as incredibly important. This is a Rosicrucian allegorical illustration representing that. It just shows how important it was, and various books will tell you how significant the appearance of this star was. And remember, It's appearing in the year 1600. It's the millennium. Now, if we'd have had something similar happen, let's say in the year 2000, a bright star suddenly appears in the sky, that would have been seen by New Agers as you know, the beginning of the age of Aquarius or something, wouldn't it? And that's exactly what the people thought back in the year 1600. Now, as Graham said, the actual star appeared in the neck of the swan. Now, we had no knowledge of that back in 1979. And if you overlay a swan, I mean, obviously you can draw a swan whatever way you want, but and actually overlay it on the landscape of the swan's neck, which remember is the River Avon. We'll come back to the importance of that. This is the River Avon. It's overlooked by this big hill called Bredon Hill. The Bree may even relate to the goddess Bride or Bridget. And what I know, and we didn't know then, is that regularly in the spring the fields flood, the River Avon floods, and it actually creates the rest of the body of the swan. So if you're on the top of Bredon Hill looking down towards the swan's neck, you see the whole swan in the landscape. Now this must have been there for hundreds of years if this tradition is remembered today. So the exact position where the green stone was recovered is the identical spot of where the new star appeared. So there's a relationship between the green stone and the idea of the beginning of this new age of enlightenment, okay? And I don't see this as something which, you know, I mean, it's beyond coincidence, but I'll come back to coincidence in a minute. Now, this is Wooller's Hall. This is on Bredon Hill. It overlooks the Swan's Neck. Now, at the time that we're talking about, it was the home of a guy called John Hanford. Now, he was a Protestant and somebody that we didn't get onto back at the time of the Green Stone, but we did earmark Wooller's Hall as possibly important. Graham and I ringed it and said we should look into that, but to be honest, we never came back to it. And the important thing is that from the chapel window at Wooller's Hall, owned by this John Hanford, at around the beginning of November, you would have seen the setting of the constellation of Cygnus as the cross, remember it's known as the Northern Cross, I mean Caroline mentioned about it being the Cross of Helen, actually standing up on the horizon at old midnight. It would have been perfectly there and it would have set directly into the Swan's Neck. Again, this seems unlikely to be coincidence. So in other words, there was something going on in this area that saw the importance of Cygnus around the year 1600. Now, John Hanford is an interesting guy. His coat of arms shows a blazing star. Okay? But even more interesting is that this blazing star was itself a stellar nova, a new star that appeared in the sky during some battle where his ancestors were fighting. So he adopted the stellar nova, the new star, as his own symbol. Now, I don't want to get too deeply into this, but it's important now just to get a little bit of background into who these people are and how they form into the story, because John Hanford was a good friend, very good friend of a guy called Thomas Russell. I think it's there, okay. Now, he was born in 1570, died in 1634. Now, he was a close friend of William Shakespeare, who obviously we know about, and also a guy called John Thornborough. Now, he was the Bishop of Worcester. And Thomas Russell's son, Francis Fitch, we'll come into him, inherited Thomas Russell's estate and lived at a place called Rushook in Alderminster, okay? And the interesting thing is that Thomas Russell married the widow of a guy called Digges, what's his name now? Thomas Digges, who was a famous mathematician, astronomer and pupil of Dr. John Dee. So he was very much associated with this circle, what they refer to, what Shakespeare refers to as the School of Night. And And Graham was alluding to this group, and it may well have a link with, you know, the so-called Order of Meonia. In other words, the same players, the same people involved. Now, John Thornborough, I mean, you could do a whole lecture on this guy. He was an alchemist, but he was also Bishop of Worcester. He lived virtually next door to Harvington Hall. And he did this book, which in Greek is it's called the Litho Theoricus. And I mean, I've got a PDF of it, and it is a very strange book, and it's all about the reality of the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone was linked to the green stone in the very earliest psychic material that came out in the Joanna sessions. But back to Humphrey Packington's epitaph, you know, on his monument in Chaddesley Corbett Church. When you read this, there is no way you cannot read this and come away with the fact that there's something weird about it, about the wording, which was actually done by his wife, his widow, Abigail. And I mean, there is an enigma here, and somebody really needs to tackle this and try and get it. But here's some of the lines. The rarest mixture of all sciences, that those who truly studied you might know, the truths which best of books obscurely show. Here I, your loyal wife, these numbers send. What the hell is all that about? And I mean, it's too much to go into, but the word alchemy keeps coming to mind. I am certain that Humphrey Packington was an alchemist, just like his close neighbour, John Thornborough. But here's where it all comes together, because Jane Thornborough, John Thornborough's daughter, married Francis Fitch, who was the heir to Thomas Russell of Rusholme. Remember, Thomas Russell is the close friend of Shakespeare, and not just a close friend, he's basically on the will. He's actually on the will of Shakespeare. And this Jane Thornborough inherited Thomas Russell's home, a place called Rushook Manor in Worcestershire, right? Now, this was the exact place where John Wall, the priest, that W.G. Lee was talking about, was arrested here in 1678, the year before he died. And remember, why was he supposedly killed? Because he wouldn't reveal where the green stone was. So the fact that he's arrested here in a home linked with all of these people suggests that the concept of the green stone was common knowledge amongst these people, and that certain people, including John Wall, either knew where it existed or knew where it was or knew where it could be found. And, you know, I find this all quite incredible, and that it links William Shakespeare. I mean, not only was Thomas Russell a close friend of William Shakespeare, but what we found out when we actually went to the area and started inquiring is that William Shakespeare actually, and I quote this, practiced his plays on the edge of the Hansford estate, on the side of Bredon Hill. You won't find that in any of the history books, but we found this was a local tradition. What the hell was going on? Why did he do that? And is there an involvement with Shakespeare? Well, after Shakespeare died, his collective volume was put together and put out under the name that the First Folio. That came out in 1623. And Ben Jonson, his contemporary, wrote this eulogy of him, which was Sweet Swan of Avon. Now, this is the same Avon. Remember, the Knight's Pool is on the River Avon. This is the same River Avon that flows through Stratford-on-Avon. Right? What a sight it were to see thee in our waters yet appear, and make those flights upon the banks of the Thames, that so did take Elisa, obviously Elizabeth, and our James. But stay, I see thee in the hemisphere, advanced and made a constellation there, shine forth, thou star of poets. Now that star is considered to be the stellar nova that appeared in Cygnus in the year 1600, as I've got one quote here. So back to Cygnus and back to the swan's neck and the green stone story again. But there is an alternative, because the star of poets could also be Deneb, the brightest star in the constellation of Cygnus, which also appears in Shakespeare's work in Hamlet. And what's so interesting is that we know that at midnight, in November, that Cygnus is on the horizon at midnight, as I said in connection with Wooler's Hall, and that Hamlet was going to originally be shown for the first time in public audience during a specific window of opportunity that fell between October 30th and November the 10th, 1601. Most likely the date chosen was either All Hallows Eve, October 31st, All Saints' Day, November the 1st, or All Souls' Day, November the 2nd, all dates fitting for old Hamlet's ghost to walk the night. At this time, Cygnus stood erect on the horizon at midnight when the ghost of Hamlet returns. Now, there's references to this. There's an article of mine online about this. So, this is a background to the Greenstone story, which is not in any of the books that you've got. But the one thing I also started, now when Marion Sunderland took the sword to the Chester Museum, they actually said that it probably wasn't anything to do with the Elizabethan period or James, the Jacobean period that followed. They suggested that it was probably a 19th century Gothic revival item. And to be honest, we accepted that for a good while. And the reason being is that, we had to accept the words of these academics that knew what they were talking about. But also psychic information started coming up that suggested that there was like a Victorian connection to the whole Meonia story that brought us on to Mary Heath and all the rest of it. We never really looked back. But more recently, I started to look at the decoration of the swords. I mean, obviously starting with the Meonia sword, and it's very clearly Elizabethan in style. I mean, just for instance, in Worcester Cathedral, is it Cathedral? I think. Anyway, there's this style. You see the meander, this, and the scallop shell, and all of it. You can start finding all of this decorative art matches exactly the style of the Meonia sword, suggesting either that the originals were made around 1600, or that the Meonia sword and or some of the other ones may date to that time frame. Right, Meonia for Mary, this famous quote actually on the sword. What the hell is all that about? Well, I mean, firstly, as I will show, the term Meonia was being used during the 16th century. Mary, spelt with an E, was used at its high point in the end of the 16th century. And the word for, which means come before something, was also very much in use. And there are actually apps online that you can check to find out word usage. And this shows that. Not Meonia, that's a special research project I did separately. And again, as Graham alluded to earlier, what we didn't know, I mean, the word Meonia, we had no idea what the hell it meant. So we actually thought it meant I am one, which I think is what you'll find in our books. But much more recently, what we realised is it was a way of spelling the kingdom of Meonia, which was in Lydia, or by Lydia in southwest Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. And it's not just about the country, but this was the place where the muses come from. Here, look, Meonia Musa. This is actually from the 16th century. There's reference to Meonia there. And it was associated with the 9 muses. The 9 muses, their spirit form, the animated form of the 9 muses, which were connected directly with Meonia and a particular mountain there called, I can't remember what it's called, Matomolus, and a river called the Pactolus, were seen to rise from there. And their main symbol was 9 swans. Those 9 swans actually fly around the island, calling out in this song at the point of birth of Apollo, the swan obviously being a symbol of Apollo. So what the word Meonia actually means, it means inspiration of the muses. It's like a rallying word for the inspiration of the muses, and it was a word that was definitely used in the late 16th, early 17th century to represent the inspiration of the muses. The muse, your muse, was Meonia. We had no knowledge of this at all. And here's the interesting thing that brings us back to the Greenstone story again, is that in medieval times, the 9 muses, because obviously they were pagan, got Christianized, as it were, and they became the 9 muses of arts and learning, of which 3 were pagan, 3 became Old Testament Jews, and 3 were the Christian knights drawn from the romances. So here's the names of them all here. And they became known as the 9 worthies. The concept of the 9 worthies was a Christianization, a Western European update, if you like, of the concept of 9 muses. And of course, why was that important? Because of the 9 worthies inside Harvington Hall, the very clue that led us to the Knight's Pool. Now, had we known all of this, we would have, got to the Knight's Pool much quicker, dug the right hole at the right time, and got to the Swan's Neck, because we'd have known all about the swans connected with the muses. But we didn't know this. But here's the thing, and this is the end of the first third of my lecture, is the fact of the matter is all of this could be coincidence, all of it. But then you have to ask yourself, well, what the hell is coincidence? Because, you've shown me all these incredible links here. Surely they can't all be coincidence. But what I will try to show you now is that what's going on in the past is still going on today, and that everything is interlinked and everything is a part of something that's evolving all the time. And what we're involved with, what the people in the past are involved with, and the people in the future are involved with at the same time. And the only way I can really show this to you is to tell you what's happened in the last couple of years and the conclusions I've come to based on that. But just going back 1 second to just some of the clues, just one. Graham talked about the incredible dream that Gaynor Sunderland had of the swan in the tower. One day she's saying, I think there's a clue in a tower. One of the clues she'd had was a ruin. Another one was this cross which we'd just come across. The third one was a bird. The third clue that Gaynor said that we should look for. So we go to the ruin, which was this mock tower, and it was 3. It was myself, Graham, and her. Went up inside this stone staircase. We started hearing this flapping of powerful wings above us, and dirt and debris started falling down. And, we continued to walk up. And after it happened about 3 times, we thought, boy, we don't want to get our eyes pecked out. Let's get out of here. Yeah, flee, as Graham said earlier on, just like good psychic questers that we are. So we did. We came out of there. And then that night, we discovered that the Swan's Neck, on the map, by the way, I've actually got that map from 1979, which I will bring tomorrow and we can have a look at. And then that night, Gaynor has this incredible dream where all 3 of us are back up that tower. We continue to the top, and the bird that's creating all of the debris is a swan. And around the neck of the swan is a pouch. In that pouch is the green stone. That's where you'll find the green stone on the neck of the swan. That was her words. Now, that's not coincidence, is it? That's a real story that led to real discoveries. So what the hell is going on? Well, last year in August, myself and some of our mates decided we'd go on a quest to the Orkneys. It was felt that we would go up there because of various reasons. As Paul Weston said earlier on, there was intimations that the foundations of the megalithic culture began in the area of the Orkneys as far back as 1980. In fact, the first person to come out with this was Graham. He had a dream about it. He actually had a dream. I've still got it recorded at home. And this inspired us to consider the possibility that all of the stone circle building cultures had begun in the area of the Orkneys. Well, now that's accepted by mainstream. There was nothing about that in 1980, as far as I'm aware. So anyway, we went up there, but it was felt that if we did go up there, something was going to happen, something quite dramatic. We weren't sure what at this time, but we had to plan what we were going to do, and there is a series of sites in a line on the Orkney Islands, going from the northwest Skara Brae, stones of Buchan, Ring of Brodgar, stones of Steness, Biggs Well, which is where there's a holy well, and it starts actually on a mountain called South Rusky Hill. And rituals actually would take place in the past from South Rusky Hill through the well to the Stones of Stenness, and would finish at an old standing stone that was right by the Stones of Stenness called the Oding Stone. And these rituals would be done for healing and weddings and all sorts of stuff like that. So there was a tradition to do with this line, or almost what you would call a ley line. But what I can also tell you is that it's actually aligned in the northwest towards the setting of the constellation of Cygnus, and to the southeast to the rising of the constellation of Orion. Those two constellations have this interplay. Well, we went to a series of sites, you know, all the ones that you've talked about there, except for the Stones of Book, and we didn't get to that. Doing stuff, very shamanic, you know, feathers, stones, weird spiral symbols, you know, doing what we felt we had to do at all of these sites towards some kind of goal. And as we went along, the momentum became stronger and stronger, the imagery became more powerful. And Debbie and also Richard started picking up that if we played our cards right, there was possibly an artefact involved. And Debbie saw what she called a hold stone, but we felt that it was possibly like a fossil, like an ammonite, but it had a hole in it, and it was symbolic of some kind of creature beneath the Orkneys called the Stool Worm. The Stool Worm is a local Orcadian form of the Midgard serpent of Norse tradition that curls around the base of the world tree Yggdrasil and turns it literally, or holds it up, or does what it does with it. But it's quite clearly a part of the cosmology of Norse mythology, and there's an Orcadian version of it called the Stool Worm. And it seemed as if the origins of this Stool Worm thing went all the way back to the Neolithic people at Orkney. And this information was coming out and beginning to develop and getting stronger. It's almost like the picture was becoming clearer and clearer as this week of questing activities went on. And then there was a huge download of stuff, which I'll come back to, at a place called the Biggs Well in this strange little wood, this fairy wood called Happy Valley. And it sent us back to two sites that we'd previously been to. One was the Stone of Stenness, which you can see here. And then on the other side of this walkway, this waterway, you know, and like an isthmus between two pieces of land is, not Scar Bray, hold on, which one, there we go, the Ring of Brodgar. And we did what we had to do at the Stone of Stenness. And by the way, it's now midnight. In fact, you know, we had to wait for some people to leave because what we felt we had to do was we had to be on our own. And by the time we got back to Brodgar, which we felt was the final site, it was, I don't know, about 12:30 or something like this. And obviously all we really wanted to do was get back and go into the pub ultimately, but now it's closed. But anyway, that's me, not anybody else. So we're in the middle of the Ring of Brodgar, which by the way you can't do anymore, the whole thing's roped off. And it was felt that we should link hands and connect with the ancestors, which we did. And I was recording everything at the time. I have done for the last 40 years, recorded everything. And we're doing this, and I'm linking hands with whoever's on my left and right, and I hear this sound coming from one of the stones in the, I can't remember which direction it was now, I think it was the east, it was towards one of the locks. And it sounded like somebody throwing a spoon against one of the rocks. And ching, there was nobody else around. There was no cars around, nobody else around at all. And that would probably about, I'm going to say about 75, 80 yards from where we were, because that's how big the stone circle is in each way, if you're standing in the centre. And I thought, what the hell was that? I mean, it was very distinctive, it was very metallic clang. And, you know, we called up the ancestors, and it was very nice. And then we sort of stopped. Oh, right, this is what happened next. We saw blue lights coming up the road, and we thought, oh my God, you know, somebody knows that we're here, particularly as we'd just gone to the Stones of Stenness, had been hanging around there for people to leave. Perhaps people think we're up to mischief. and they've called the police and they want us off. Right, so I'm thinking, oh God, what are we going to say? I'm going to say, my name's Andrew Collins, I'm a historical researcher, I'm doing some work. Well, but what am I doing here at the middle of the night? You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm thinking this, I'm thinking shit. And anyway, finally the lights come right up to the Ring of Brodgar, the little road by the side of it. But then they carry on, and we realise it's not a police car, it's an ambulance. There's a relief. But we think, something's saying, get out of here now. I mean, quite clearly that's an omen that we should leave. So we start to walk away, and I said to Deb, I heard a strange noise whilst we were there. She said, what was that? And I told her. And she said, well, that's strange, because she said, I thought I saw a flash of light in that direction. She said, I wouldn't have been able to pinpoint where it was. She said, I just thought it was a meteor or something like that. So it was like, well, yeah, but we're now leaving. But I mentioned it again. She said, well, do you think we should look? And I said, well, yeah, let's go there. So we went over to that particular stone. We went first to the mound behind it to have a look there, but there was nothing there. So we went over to the stone, and we started to, well, Deb touched the stone. She felt something happening there, felt that it was warm, that something was going on. And we were led down to the base of the stone and started pulling it away. It was Richard, I think, that saw it for the first time. Realised that there was something there, and we actually found this hold ammonite, exactly as had been described psychically, gradually building that week. An artefact that was quite clearly described psychically, retrieved psychically. And of course, obviously, we were all elated, but the fact of the matter is, if I had not have heard that noise coming from that exact stone, we would not have found that. Now, the fact of the matter is, who the hell put that there? I mean, it could have been some new ager the previous day. I mean, people put, little offerings around stones. But for some reason, we were meant to find it. And it had been described, it related to the quest. It was even suggested that Neolithic priests may have worn these sort of things around their neck. And before we'd embarked on this, Debbie had said that if we play our cards right and do what we've got to do, we're going to make connections with what she was starting to describe as the end beings. So who the hell are the end beings? Well, this was a term which even I'd never heard of that. I said, well, who the hell are the end beings? What are you talking about? She said, well, n-dimensional. N being for n for number. We don't know how many other dimensions they are. I feel that there are consciousness, intelligence that are multidimensional, that interact with us, and that for most of the time they're not interested in us, but just occasionally, if you prod them hard enough, they'll turn around and say, who's that? And when that happens, some kind of connection with them will occur. So in other words, they're basically trans-dimensional beings, consciousness or intelligent, that coexist with us, and maybe behind what we'd refer to as UFOs and a lot of other activity which we associate with portals today. Places like Skinwalker Ranch in America, Bempton in Yorkshire in the UK, and many other places around there. So I remember saying to Debbie, I said, yeah, whatever, yeah, okay. It was like, well, let's just do our quest and we'll worry about anything like that afterwards. But then afterwards, she said the same thing, something happened during that, something occurred. I said, okay, fine. Well, when we were at Bigswell, this was before we obviously found the artefact. We got there, and this was in many ways the high point of the quest, because we got there and there was a sense of urgency. We'd been there the previous day, felt we had to go back to do an important meditation, and Debbie felt very strongly that something was going on. For the one and only time during this, she was basically overshadowed, and these two fairies or giantesses, because fairies in some mythologies are not small, called Fina and Mina, who were turning this meal, like the meal that holds up the cosmic axis, suddenly appeared. We never heard of their names before, and wanted to talk to us and gave us this whole long rhyme to solve. And we did that, and that enabled us to tell where we should be and what we were to do thereon. And it was definitely a high point. It's an incredible night. And that night we realised exactly what we had to do and how the quest was going to go. This is what it looks like, as Debbie there. But the thing was, that was great in itself, but my colleague, the engineer Rodney Hale, will examine everything that happens after our quest. He'll look at photographs, he'll look at sound recordings, you know, just seeing if there's anything of interest. And he found something of incredible interest at the exact moment that Debbie fell into a trance and this Fina and Mina came through. By the way, we checked out, they do exist. And they are like these turners of the cosmic meal. Rodney detected on a spectrogram low frequency activity below the human hearing at around 50 hertz. It starts when she starts to talk and ends when she finishes talking in this trance state. And Rodney Hale has got no explanation for this whatsoever. He checked through like dozens and dozens of sound recordings that we'd made previously, looking to see if he could find anything similar, and found only one example. It was when myself, Richard Wald, and another friend of ours were in Rendlesham Forest, a place associated with a lot of weird stuff, UFOs, aliens, transdimensional stuff, had actually tried to call upon what Debbie was referring to as the end beings. An exact point where we'd finished this ritual, we're actually using a call to Pan, there was another burst of activity, exactly the same. And this suddenly made me remember what Debbie said about these end beings. That I thought, well, maybe this was them turning around at that moment. Maybe this was the point we made contact with them, and this was them turning around and saying, "Whoa, who's under there?" Right. This was their response. So, you know, suddenly all of this is taking on, the discovery of this artefact is taking on a new meaning. And I suppose you might say that I had a bit of a download, and because I wrote up everything, and I also started receiving what we needed to do when we go away next time. And this is what I wrote down at the time. I only found this the other day, and I thought, this is it. The whole stone symbolises the turning or bending of time, whether this be forwards or backwards. Its worm-like appearance not only resembled the mythical guise of the Orkney Stool Worm, but also its wider form as the Midgard serpent coiled around the base of Yggdrasil in its role as the turning mechanism of the heavens, the manner in which cyclic time was measured by astronomer priests. One of the purposes of the ammonite is to help define how exactly psychic quests work. They are the result not of some linear process dictated by guiding spirits, but the consequence of non-linear causality working using quantum entanglement. So what the hell does that mean? And that was published, I sent that on the 28th of September 2018, shortly after we came back. And this is what I think is going on. Time, as we know it, is not what we think. The past, the present, and the future can all coexist, and there are a lot of scientific theories that would back this up. And that through a process known as non-locality or quantum entanglement, the idea that entangled particles can quite literally respond if they are tweaked with their twinned partner, no matter how far apart they get, whether it be the other opposite ends of the universe, they still retain a link between them. And if you think that there are countless, you know, particles in everything, all of which have a twin, and all of which are relating to each other, it opens the possibility of telepathy, mind over matter, and also precognition. Precognition, the idea of seeing future things. We assume that this is just some kind of divine thing, you know, the intervention that, you know, the spirits or God or whatever it is wants us to know about something that's going to happen in the future. Well, what if it isn't coming from spirits? What if it's just coming from ourselves in the future? Linear projections of ourselves, of what could be going on in the future. So in other words, the future may be influencing the present might be influencing the past might be influencing the present, and the present influencing the future. All of it is in some way linked. And if that's the case, then is it not possible that the discovery of an artifact comes first? In other words, the fact that it becomes so important, whether it be the Meonia sword, the green stone, or the hold ammonite, or any one of the other dozens of artefacts we find, that this is what basically comes first. But then the loop comes into play, what in science known as a Klein loop, which means that you have to fulfill the actions that will lead to that eventual goal. And we call it nonlinear causality. And what this, again, let's just try and throw this together. I mean, it's almost a case that the planting of the object in the first instance sends out some kind of beacon. Not so much the planting, but the discovery of it, the excitement, the elation of the fact of finding it sends out a signal with information that goes backwards through time. So that the more sensitive people amongst us, you know, like Richard, Debbie, Graham, etc., pick up on that intuitively because of their sensitivity and realise that there's something out there to be found. However, you're not going to find it unless you take exactly the right steps. And it's a case of finding those steps. And those steps are the quest itself. So in other words, you're finding something you've already found. And what you're doing is you're trying to find the steps you've already taken in the future. And if that's the case, then we can use this to our advantage, because if we understand what's going on, we can fine-tune those quests, and I'll show you how we did that in a minute. But I just wanted to give you one example of how this works. When Debbie and I were partners and we lived together back in the early 90s, one day she got up, we were going to go to the Tate Gallery, I'm going to say, the old Tate, and she said, I had a dream about some strange, you know, apocalyptic scene last night. I said, all right, okay, jot it down. And we got on the train and we got on the underground, we came off the underground, and as soon as we got off the underground, she had a flash of this same apocalyptic scene. And she says, I can see it again, it's a painting. And as we walked towards the Tate, she said, I think it's here. And I can't remember if she did pick up the name of the artist or not at the time, but the closer we got to the museum, the clearer the information became. And when we got in there, we eventually found that the painting that she was talking about was by John Martin, who was, I think, one of the inspirations of William Blake. And there's about 3 John Martin paintings in there. And there it was, exactly the thing that she'd seen in a dream vaguely, but the nearer we got to the Tate, the stronger it was. It was almost like the percentage factor, the accuracy, the clarity got stronger, the more likely it was that we would actually go in the Tate and see it. Now, up to that point of, say, getting off the underground, anything could have happened. We could have decided not to go, or there could have been a train problem, or, anything could have stopped us. But when we got off the underground and were walking, now the percentage factor of us going into the museum and finding it was now up to, let's say, 95%. And then obviously we get in the right room, there it is, 100%, bang, there it is. That's how I think it works. When you're on a psychic quest, that percentage factor, which I've tried to illustrate here vaguely, about the idea of this information coming back in time gets stronger and stronger. The percentage of that clarity gets higher and higher, the more likely it becomes you will find that artifact, which you've already found, because it's already in the future. You're just picking up on what you've already done, but you have to take the right steps. So, bearing that in mind, we were in Orkney, and myself and Richard Wald, as we normally do meditations on a Saturday night. And of course, one subject matter that comes up is, if we go on another Beano, as we call them, next year with our mates, where are we going? Does it lead on from what we've already done? Who knows? And almost immediately, Richard and I started picking up that we had to go to Wales this year, 2019. And the place that loomed big immediately was a place called Cadair Idris. Now, this is a mountain. I knew about it, not simply from a geographical point of view, but Graham Phillips and Caroline, I think Boyd might have been there, Boyd Lees who's here, had actually gone there in 1982. Midsummer, was it? Midsummer? Yeah. And Graham had felt that something was going to happen at a certain time. I won't go into the full story, but and that there was a countdown to a particular time and moment. And exactly as that moment occurred, a ball of light came out of the mountain and just shot right over their heads. And amongst them was Paul Devereux. Now, he is one of the world's leading experts today on what's called earth lights, the idea of mysterious balls of light coming out of the earth and being sighted. And this really affected him. You'll find it mentioned in his book, Earth Light's Revelation. But he doesn't say exactly how it happened. He'll just say, I happened to be at Cadair Idris and this weird light appeared, and describes it. Well, it was all part of a psychic quest. So I knew about this, but it seemed as if it were being drawn there, and the sense was that there was going to be another encounter somehow with the M being. Something was going to happen. Something was going to make things a lot clearer as to what they relate to. And the other place that was coming up was a lake actually on Cadair Idris, which is known as Lyn Cow. You can see it here. This is a painting by Richard Wilson from the 18th century. And immediately we started picking up on we were going to have to do a very important ritual on the banks of this lake, and something was going to manifest. Something was going to happen. Now, I mentioned this to Debbie, and she said, I can see this lake. She says, I can see like a ball of light. She said, it's almost like this, in modern terms, they call it like a mecha like almost like this geometric form. And inside it is this deer, like a stag, like a white stag. And she says, I don't know why I'm seeing it, but she says, it's very, very important, and that we're going to be connected with this and almost projecting our minds into this ball of light. So I said, great, scribbled it down. And I also did some research into this area around Cadair Idris and found it was very strongly associated with human giants of the past, something that Hugh would be very interested in. I think if he doesn't already know this story, he probably does. But in 1685, right at the base of Cadair Idris, close to a lake called Tallylin, a huge coffin was discovered, right? I think it was made of wood, and inside it were the bodies of two giants. The femur, the leg bone, was 27 inches in length, suggesting a height of around 7 feet 8 inches. And another similar burial was found with other two figures close by, similar heights, plus then another burial with two normal-sized people. And because these individuals had, when they were discovered, hazel rods with them, hazel is in Celtic mythology and tradition is associated with magic and druids. It was felt that these giants were actually druids. So obviously the fact we're onto the Denisovans and everything, and we feel that the Denisovans may have been of extraordinary size, I'm thinking, is it possible that people were being drawn to this mountain in the past to do with whatever was going on there? Now, there's lots and lots of legends. I mean, Idris himself is a giant. There's actually 3 giants associated with the top of the mountain. All 3 of them are ancient astronomers. And there's lots of strange lights reported around Cadair Idris. For instance, the famous song, Men of Harlech, in one version, opens with the line, tongues of fire on Idris flaring, clearly referring to mysterious lights on the mountain. And the phantom dogs are supposed to, fly out of there. There are fairies connected with it, witches. There's a beast connected with Lyn Cow. It's one of these places that you can't make up the amount of myths and legends associated with it. So we thought, brilliant, let's go for it, Oh, sorry, getting too excited now. So in August this year, a motley crew, well, same motley crew from the previous year, went to West Wales. You can see a picture of us there, most of us, and a little bit of background about what we felt we had to do. I mean, more information came out, and remember now we've got the sense that if we do this correct, we're going to get a result out of it, or we hope to get a result. We're not sure what it is, but we'll go for it. And what it was suggested is that there was an importance in this symbol called the Arwing. The Arwing is a symbol of inspiration in Welsh bardic or druidic tradition that, I'll show a picture of it in a minute, but basically it's 3 prongs with coming from 3 little balls, looking like, like a fleur-de-lis type thing. And that this meant the same as Meonia. The Arwing and Meonia are exactly the same. Caroline suggested this, that we should chant the druidic name of God, which is IAO, and do it as a chant at each of the sites. So we said, yep, we'll do that. We also used primal tones, a series of primal tones. We used one at the first series of sites, another one at the second series, and another at a third series, and at the end of it we'd bring all 3 of them together. And part of this was like a journey through the underworld. We'd have to visualise ourselves going through like a cave system from place to place. But the other important thing is that all of the sites that we were interested in, which began on the Isle of Anglesey and ended in the area of Cadair Idris, were in a straight line. And we thought, well, this is another straight line of sites, just like on the Orkneys. And each of the 3 sets of sites, there was going to be a different animal associated with the Celtic underworld. At the first series of sites, it would be a white bird called the lapwing. In the second series of sites, it would be these white hounds with red ears. These are the hounds of the underworld. And at the third site, it was the stag or deer, the white deer. And all of them were associated with the Celtic underworld, which was known as the Annwn, or however it's pronounced. And so that's what we had to do. And the first site that we had to do anything was this place called Pass Mountain in north-east Anglesey, which involved creating an arrow made of wheat and firing it symbolically down the line. And this would symbolise our own points of consciousness going down this line from point to point, almost like going ahead of us to pick up information. So that's what you can see Lisa here doing. It's Caroline and Kerry there. Now, but before we could actually start, Richard had picked up by name that there were a group of witches from the past whose influence was so strong in this area, but they're also quite bad witches. They put curses on people, all sorts of stuff, that they ruled the roost in this area, and that we had to appease them before we did anything. They're known as the witches of Landonna. And this is supposed to be an image of one of them, a representation called Short Betty. I mean, if you speak Welsh and I pronounce it wrong, I apologise. And you can see a logo there about the witches of Landonna, and they're connected. And basically the story is that they turned up in a boat one day off the coast of Anglesey, possibly having come from Ireland, but they had no oars. And what was usual is that the people that have no oars have been pushed off, and they're like criminals. So, in other words, they're left to their own fate. The sea will generally, take them up and they'll die. But sometimes they'll make landfall somewhere else, and that they have to be avoided. So people avoided these witches, and because of that, they resented it, and they would curse all the local people on Anglesey. So what we had to do, we felt, appropriately, was before we could do any magical workings in this area, we had to appease the witches of Landonna. And there were certain gifts that were always given to them, including eggs, bread, meat, and something else. So before we did any of this, we made that offering and left that on the mountain. So once we'd done that and we were on the way, the next site that we had to go on Anglesey was this cave here, which had a holy well in it. Holy well, springing out. And it's called a place called Llanbadrig, right, or St Patrick's Well Cave. Now we couldn't actually get down to the cave, it was just too dangerous on that day, so we did it from a safe spot very close by, which you can see us all there. There's the church of Madrid. And the idea was that this cave was going to represent the entrance of us going into the underworld. So we go into this underworld, but we also assume there's going to be obstacles in it. And just as obstacles begin to start appearing and people start seeing things that need to be navigated and could be nasty, like big spiders and whatever, you know, possibly symbols of the goddess Arianrod, who's connected with the island, is this figure appears. Debbie says, I can see this figure, human figure. He's got a silver hand, and he wants us to hold on to his hand, and he will guide us through Annwn or Anwyn, the Celtic underworld. So in other words, he will take us through the darkness of these caves and bring us out into the light. So I said, okay, yeah, so we all see this figure, this silver hand, and on we go. And he makes a couple of appearances, this figure, and although it's clear that this is a mythical character as well, who I'll come on to, he's giving a earthly name. And the name basically was Llewellyn Zion, or Llewellyn John. And Deb picks up that he lived in the 16th century. He was some kind of bard stroke druid, and that he's embodied within this figure, this spirit figure that wants to help us. And he starts giving us some information. We eventually check him out whilst we're there, and he was born in 1540, died in 1650. And he was one of the inspirations for the Gorsedd festivals in Wales, and some attribute this so-called thing called the Bardis, which is like the philosophy of the Druids and Bards to him, although that's considered to be spurious. But he exists, there's no question about that, he exists. And he, for some reason, he wanted to help us. So, okay, thank you very much. And that's the Arwing symbol there. I mean, those could be 3 stars. Whether you want to see them as Cygnus or Orion, it's up to you. But you know, this is the inspiration. This is almost a symbol of Meonia, it's a symbol of the Arwing. And this silver hand, I mean, you know, the astute amongst us realise that this is also a god form, that there's a god called Nuada of the silver hand. He was the king of the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, in the form of the British god Nodens, who was an underworld god. His epithet was the silver hand, basically, and this is one of the only representations, Celtic Iron Age representations of him. And you can see he's obviously showing his arm and hand, which obviously represents that silver hand. So for some reason, this figure is also embodying this god as well. So we continue to the second series of sites, and we come out the underworld at these old copper mines in the area of Dinas Emrys, that's it, you know, the old fort of Merlin. And we end up in this field here, which is known as the Grove of the Magicians. I won't try and pronounce the Welsh here, which is on the screen. It's right at the base of Dinas Emrys. Now, we've been there before. You'll find it mentioned in the Seventh Sword. This was part of the so-called Keys of Balance quest from 1990. So you keep looking at that. You're obviously trying to read that. It says Cel e Dywiniad, but that's almost certainly not how it's pronounced, so forgive me, Welsh speakers. So anyway, whilst we were doing there, we're connecting with local energy. I think it was this same mythical figure that was appearing to us. I think there may have been part of an influence of Merlin going on there as well. But whilst I'm in Med, I see that there's an artefact involved, and I see this crystal ball, not very big, and I mean, it was like, you know, probably made of rock crystal, but it seemed like quite dark. It didn't seem to be like a bright, clear one. It was quite dark. I just felt that it was hanging around, that, you know, it was an artefact out there somewhere. I'm not saying we'll find it, but it's out there somewhere. And as I mentioned that, Kerry said, oh my God, I saw a crystal ball as well. And she said somebody was throwing it up into the air and catching it. And Debbie said, well, I saw a crystal ball as well. She said, but it was black. And she said it seemed to be in the hands of this you know, Llewellyn Zion guy. So, you know, for some reason, at that point, crystal balls started to come up. Now, remember, I'm thinking, you know, if all of this has already been played out in some kind of linear future and that non-local causality is involved here, We need to just go along with this, go with the flow, and just see where it all leads. But we next went from the Grove of the Magicians onto Dinis Emrys itself. Not to the top. It was felt by Debbie that we had to go to a waterfall. Now, I'd looked up online to see if there were any waterfalls on Dinis Emrys, and I've been up there a few times. I didn't know of any. But actually, when we got there and we asked around, we found there were actually two. One of which you can see here, and another one we didn't get up close to. And I said to Debbie, I said, which one have we got to use? And she said, this one. Now, this is the point where I'm thinking, you've got to make the right choices, because if you go to the wrong waterfall, you may well be not treading on the path that you're meant to tread. In other words, you know, this future steps that you've already taken to achieve something, if you make the wrong move here, you could go off at a tangent and everything could fail. So, you know, we're thinking now differently. We're thinking that in the future, not the past, in the future, we've already made the right decision to get the right result. So it's crucial we do go to the right waterfall in this case. So we go up that waterfall. We see imagery to do these white hounds of Annwn with these red ears coming out, and they come out there and we release them, and it's all very nice. And we go on to the next site, which is the area around Cadair Idris now. So this is the final area, the third and final area of sites that we know how to do something. And I mentioned earlier about these giants that were found in the coffins at the base of Dinis Emrys. Well, before we actually went up Dinis Emrys, we had a little scout around the area, and I actually found the farm where these giants were found, Chen Dol Ithel, right? And that's the name that's given in the 1685 account. So somewhere there, and that's Dinis Emrys behind it, that's where those giant coffins were found. I mean, this was just a little aside. I'm just throwing this in to show that, you know, when this stuff comes up, we do try and check it out as well. And this is where it is. If you carry on the road here, this is where the farm is, where the giants were found. And this is the route here. Oh, it's not working now. This is the route that you take to get to Ling Khao. And I'd already been up one holy mountain this year in China, and coming down off that, thousands and thousands of steps did my back in massively, and my knees. And this time I just said to everybody, make sure you have these walking sticks. It might make us look 85, but it will save our backs and it will save our legs. And everybody thanked me afterwards for this, because this was such an important move. You know, climbing a mountain, and it's not getting up, it's coming down that's the worst. Because that's the thing that really plays on your knees. Anyway, you don't need to know this, you're all too young. But one day you'll know about it. But anyway, so we started the walk going up to Ling Khao. And one of the things that we knew we had to do, and this was information that Richard and I had come up with the previous year after the previous quest in the Orkneys, was that Ling Khao itself, as this huge cauldron-like lake, was representative of the cauldron of the Welsh goddess Ceridwen. Now, Ceridwen is involved in a story which has her stirring the cauldron of plenty, and it's got this brew in it, this brew of inspiration that gives Arwing, gives inspiration. And she's got this young boy helper called Gwion, and he's stirring it, and he splashes 3 small drops, which obviously is the same as the, oh my God, what am I doing? The same drops as on the Arwing symbol itself, and he becomes enlightened. She doesn't like this, so he then transforms into an animal, and she transforms into another animal to try and catch it. And they go through a series of shape-shifting expositions where finally he becomes I think it's a grain of wheat, and she becomes a chicken and eats him, and then she transforms back and then gives birth to the child again, but now he becomes the poet and hero of Welsh mythology called Taliesin. Okay? Now, it's just a myth, but this idea of the cauldron we felt was very important, and that we ourselves would have to create some kind of brew which would have to be taken, a small amount of each, that would somehow inspire, give us the Arwing or the Meonia, if you want to call it that. So, cut a long story short, I tried to make this homemade absinthe based on something that was coming through my head, and it didn't go very well. And so, I mean, by the time we got to the top of the mountain, but we meant to do it halfway up, but we realised this was just not going to be practical, and we had to wait until we actually got onto the side of the lake, which you can see here. This is Lynn Cow. So some of the folks up there. It gets very cold, by the way, by the time you get to the top of the mountain. So we did the whole thing there. There were various things involved, some of which I'll come back to in a minute, but and part of it was just taking a small amount of this weird homemade absinthe that I'd created, which was the most foul thing you could ever possibly taste. I mean, there was just almost no point in taking it, but it's something that the people involved are not going to forget in a hurry. So, I mean, I don't think it inspired us whatsoever, but it seemed to be the right thing to do. There was also a symbolic death of myself, which I'll come back to in a minute. I had to be sacrificed, quite literally, up there, symbolically, of course. I mean, you know, still in now, so obviously, and we weren't quite sure why this was at the time, but it seemed to be something to do with the fact of what I'd done in China, something to do with the symbol of the white dragon, which had been important when I was in China. But we just went for it. I mean, I had to dress up in the robes that had been given to me in China, which is the robes of an immortal. So I went through all this. I mean, you do what you're told to do. Whatever comes through psychically, if it makes sense, do it, basically, because that could be the correct path to get your goal. And so we do what we have to do. We do the chants, the IAO chants. We do the tones. I do this guided meditation. Debbie takes over, and it all then stops. And the final thing that I'm describing before Debbie starts is the very first image that Debbie had seen, which was this geometric form hanging over the lake, which is known in modern New Age terms as a Merkaba, it's like these interconnected tetrahedrons, as almost like a symbol of entry into a multidimensional realm. And inside it is this stag form, this white stag. And we're visualizing this, and this is the final image, and we then project our minds into that, and eventually, connect with that, and the imagery is then allowed to drop. And I stop this, and I then say, right, okay, I'm passing it on to Deb. She says a few things, and something strange started to happen, which I'll talk to you about. I'll come on to that in a minute, but before I come on to that, what Debbie saw at this point, coming into view across the lake, so almost like, walking on water in a way, was this figure on a horse who was Nuada of the Silver Hand, but he was also Llewellyn Zion, but now he definitely had another identity, one that had been suggested earlier, but now it seemed clear. He was Arwing, the leader of the wild hunt and the king of the underworld, whose very animals, you can see here, the white hounds with the red ears, and the other animals were all the animals of his underworld creatures. And what happens is that he has in his hand this ball, this crystal ball, which Debbie had seen before, but although now it was more nebulous, it was more like some kind of mini universe, if you like. So not like a glass ball, but like a mini circular universe, inside which was this swirling galaxy-like effect. I think I've actually represented it here. Yep, here we go. And he basically tells her to connect with it, to basically touch it. And so she touches it in mind, which is very real for her. And she's describing this as this is happening, by the way, so it's all recorded. This intense cold comes over her, to the point that she cannot go any further. And it's almost like this Arwing stroke, this figure wants her to enter inside this sphere and become at one with it. But it's something that she realised instantaneously was so dangerous that she was becoming freezing, and she just broke out of it. And that was it. And she was so cold that we had to crowd around her and give her energy, give her warmth, all the rest of it. And she was almost went into a hypothermia. And, you know, clearly something had happened. But what the hell was really going on here? Well, just before this happened, and actually still whilst it was happening in the background, everybody heard something. And the moment that we heard we were visualising this deer within this tetrahedron type, Lekebar type geometry, sphere thing. Immediately I stopped it and I handed it over to Debbie. There was this incredible sound started to appear to echo around the crater of Lin Cow. And you know, obviously we're all quiet, you know, and each one of us are thinking, what the fuck is that? I mean, and it sounded like a battle going on. I mean, it sounded like skirmishes, battles, screams, shouts, everything. And it was like revolving around and around and around. And, you know, and Debbie's trying to say stuff, which is the stuff I've just been telling you, and I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? It was almost like the whole thing is all interrelated and as one. Now, I think, hopefully, if this works okay, I should be able to play the sound now. At the beginning of all of the binary code messages. So I want you now just to be aware of the deer contained within that light. And I want you now to listen to what Debbie has to say to take it on to the next level. This cacophony, we came out of it and obviously all started talking about what the hell was going on. And everybody just was talking about this sound. And my colleague, the engineer Rodney Hale, examined it. And this is, I think, me and Debbie talking. You can see that's the frequencies relating to it. But this here is the cacophony, and it starts about 400 hertz and goes up to about 1100 hertz. And it's basically outside the realms of normal speech, you know, at any kind of distance. If you're shouting into a mic, you'll get it. And we went away from here. I mean, I'll tell you what else happens in a minute, but we went away from here and we're trying to find a logical answer to this. You know, what the hell's going on? Now, there are other people up on Lin Cow, not many, but there are other people that have braved it and come up there. And there were some children. I mean, group perhaps 15, 20 children, and they had some teachers with them. And I thought, oh, maybe it's them. But Rodney and everybody that's heard this and everybody that was present said this was not children. This was something completely different. But as I said, remember this whole thing to do with battles, okay? Because this becomes an important clue. Because this was 2 days before we were due to finish our vacation in Wales. The next day we were going to go out, but it rained the entire day. I mean, seriously rained, and we realised that it was probably best just to recover, do nothing, and that was that. Now, we'd done a little meditation when we got back, and I think Debbie picked up something about a local church at Tallylinn on the lake, but because it was so raining so much, we just didn't go out there. We just all felt we needed a rest. And the next morning we were going to leave to go back to our respective homes. And that night, you know, obviously people are beginning to pack up stuff and whatever. I said, well, should we do a med? Do another med? Anybody? You know? And so, yeah, all right, yeah, I suppose we can do another one. You know, one more before we go back, you know. Yeah, okay, let's do that. So we gathered around this beautiful old table. You know, it was like, I can't remember if it was oak, but it looked like an oak table in this little cottage in mid Wales. And, you know, dimmed down the light, put the music on. And Debbie saw this Llewellyn Zion, the figure, this 16th century bardic character. And he was now at another church, a church that was painted white. And the sense was that there was some kind of druid plunge pool behind it, or not behind it, but in the vicinity of it. And that druids would go in there and immerse themselves to initiate, you know, to be initiated into the druid priesthood, and they would probably have to spend the whole night in there or something like this. And that this was in druid times, probably, let's say, you know, 500-600 AD, maybe before, maybe after, and that maybe it still had been continued to use as a plunge pool, but that eventually these ideas had faded and it just became another holy well, and she felt strongly there's a link with the Virgin Mary, St Mary, that may be dedicated to that. But it was a very old well, probably incredibly old, and went back further than people even knew. Now the sense was that the area was also a place of battle. Again, remember this. And we had actually checked out and found there was another battle in the area of Cadaridris, which was another coincidence. But the feeling is this battle. There's a battle in this area. And so we looked online and we eventually found, you know, a decent candidate. And it was a place called Pillith, St Mary's Church, the site of the Battle of Pillith, Bringlas in 1402. English against the Welsh. I can't remember who won actually. I think it was probably the English, but I can't remember. Anyway, around the back of it, or we didn't know it was around the back, but you know, so attached to it was a holy well, and there was one decent picture of it online, and it had these steps going down. It was made of stone. It looked really old, and you know, we sort of lifted up the computer and said, "Here, Deb, does it look like that?" Yeah, that looks similar. Yeah, that might be it. Okay, so it was a case of, well, should we go? You know, on the way home, because that was in East Wales. We were in West Wales, so we could, you know, go via this place on the way back. Why not, you know? So we go to Pillith, and that's obviously where this picture comes from. But we park the cars. We're walking up through the churchyard, the probably position that I've actually taken this picture, and probably whilst I was actually doing this, and we hear, coming from the church, this is the middle of nowhere, there's no major villages or towns around this, it's just middle of nowhere, we can hear this chanting coming from the inside of the church. So we're thinking, well, that's weird. But anyway, we get closer and we listen to what's actually being chanted. It's the very chant we've been using all week at all the other sites, this I won't do the chant now. And it was just coming out of it, just blasting out of this church. It's a Christian church and a druidic chant coming out of it. You think, what the hell is going on? And this threw us for a minute. And, you know, a few of us went round the back looking for the holy well, and Caroline and I think one of the others actually went into the church to find out what the hell was going on, who was doing this. And they go in, and the person sitting down there with his new partner and his partner's daughter is Charles Topham, one of the 7 sword holders in the whole 7, you know, Swords of Meonia rituals, 7 sword rituals, who we've not seen for a few years, and to be honest, been slightly estranged from our group. And there he was, obviously very delighted to see us. And it was a case of, what do we do? I mean, you know, we did not expected to see anybody else. And, you know, if you're on an active quest, you know, you built up a momentum. It's very difficult suddenly to let other people in on what you're actually doing, to be honest. But we had a conversation, and eventually, you know, they decided to go off, and we were going to go, but the sense was to hang back, that there's something else going on here. By the way, we'd actually found the holy well stroke druidic plunge pool around the back, and it looked weird. I think this is the interior of the church at Pillith. That's where they were sitting down. It was only them, nobody else there at all. And that's us around the back of the church. Just take a photograph before anything else happened. So, anyway, Debbie says, you know, something's going on here, something's happening, and we need to get to that pool. Now, that plunge pool. So we go back round, and she said, this has got to do with you, Andy. She said, this is about some kind of rebirth, in the sense that something's going to happen, I sense, that's going to change your life, something that's going to affect everything. And she said, you know, if you go for this, you know, be prepared for this. I said, okay, fine, you know, whatever she said. But when she'd seen Llewellyn Zion actually in the pool himself in the 16th century, she'd seen him do it naked. Okay? And suggested that if I go for this, I'm going to have to do the same, that this rebirth would have to be done naked. Okay? But that this was a part of it, and the thing about me is, you know, occasionally my clothes do fall off, as some of my friends do know. So I said, yeah, I'm game. And Debbie said, yeah, but hold on. She said, be careful. She said, this is not a joke. She said, what's going to happen here if something's happened, because I get the sense something will, is that this is going to change everything. You know, not just for you, but for everybody else. You know, the people around you, possibly, you know, those that read your books or whatever, right? So I said, okay. Now, obviously by this point, you think, just maybe we're on for an artefact. But you see in front of you this murky water, which has got frogs swimming around in it. And you think, okay, right, well, I can't really see. I mean, maybe there is something in the water, we've got feel around and whatever. So I remove my clothes and go down the steps and realise that as I'm going up the steps, the water only comes up to my knees. So what I've actually got to do to totally immerse myself is to twist around and splash and crash down into this, which, you know, lengthwise there was enough room, and go completely under this cold, murky water with frogs swimming around, which is exactly what I do. I apologise that I have to put such pictures into my lecture. So I immediately come out of this, right, and Deb said she saw a flash of light go from the back of the pool to about halfway along. But, you know, I'm thinking, is there something in the water or something? She said, no. She said, it's above water. She said, I don't know what it is. She said, but there's something above the water line. At which point, I see that close to the water's edge, about midway along, is a small alcove, a small hole. And as I bend down and look into it, I can see something inside it, something spherical. And it is a orb, a sphere. And this is not just any orb, because as soon as I held it, not only could I see the galaxy, the swirling galaxy inside it, which actually caused within the obsidian, it's a particular type of obsidian called silver sheen obsidian, but I could immediately feel something going on in my hands. I mean, really, really badly. I mean, to the point that it was like one of those TENS machines that you put on your back and you go, chick, 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 chick. You know, the electrical pulses. There was something like, now I don't normally feel this sort of stuff from crystals and whatever, but this was, I could sense this immediately. And so, you know, obviously I get out and, you know, hand it to the others, and they obviously start feeling the same. This is what it looks like. Now, unfortunately, it's very difficult to take a picture of the interior, but you can see the whole swirling mass. But the interesting point is that the way it had been placed, it was that the swirling galaxy was perfectly upwards when it was in that hole. And the only way you could get into that hole would have been to actually get into the water and to have placed it there. Now, bear in mind that anybody could have put this there. Anybody. It could have been put there by some New Ager the previous day, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who put it there or how it got there. It's the quest and that discovery. And so what the hell is this? Well, Debbie feels and that this object represents, by the way, she feels that it actually did belong to Llewellyn Zion in the 16th century, and that he had something, well, he had that. Now, I don't know whether that's so, because, I mean, quite clearly you can get, you know, these type of obsidian balls today. So who knows how old it is? There's no way of really telling. But it really doesn't matter. As I said, it's what it symbolises. And everybody could feel that it just pulsing through your hands. I mean, even Ivan over here, who's a scientific man of material existence, we gave it to him to hold, and even, if he'll admit it now, hopefully, that there was something going on with it, that it affected his hands. So, what is it? Well, Debbie had said that if we play our cards right again, we would find a closer link to the end beings, and she feels that this is almost like some kind of communicator with them, and that its full value and purpose will come out across time. And Richard and I have used it in a couple of meditations very sparingly. In fact, we've almost referred to it as psychic Viagra, basically, because it's almost like, you know, if you need the extra boost for imagery, that's, you know, bring it down, but it affects you. It seriously affects you. So we're going to experiment with it. We're going to work with it. Clearly, other things will happen in the future. We'll be told what to do. We've got some idea of that. And this link with what we call the end beings is something that's going to get stronger and stronger. And yes, this has changed my life, because I made the decision based on this discovery that the next book I'm going to be writing is about transdimensional portals, places like Skinwalker Ranch and Bempton, and the intelligences behind them, who we call the end beings now. So that's it really, but just let's go back to the beginning, just to end. Because this is Graham and I, back in the early 80s, still trying to wonder why the hell we'd found these artefacts and where this would lead us. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the day, you know, in many ways, everything we've done since that time has in some way been inspired by those discoveries. And we were meant to find them because we'd already found them, if you get what I mean. The significance of the discovery, the fact we'd write our books, was already out there somewhere. We just had to take the right path. We didn't have to know all the background information that we found today. We just had to take the right path, make the right moves, listen to the psychics around us, people like Alan Beard or Gaynor, and we'd get there. But at that point, we didn't even think we'd find anything, to be honest. I mean, when we finally found the sword, I mean, apparently I was in tears virtually. I mean, screaming and shouting because we didn't actually think we'd find something. I mean, you know, but at that point we were just so worried as well because the information tended to suggest that others were also looking for these artefacts, and that worried us because we thought, well, where are they? Are they here? Are they, you know, are they on the way? So we just felt we had to get out. But now, obviously, we can see things in a much more clearer light of day. And of course, what's happened? I mean, that was 40 years ago. And then last Friday, screened across the world, Graham Phillips and I doing this double act on the Isle of Orkney, 40 years after he's picked up psychic stuff about megalithic culture beginning there. And there we are on Ancient Aliens saying exactly the same thing, that the megalithic culture begins in the Orkney Islands with the stone circles like stones of Stennes, the Ring of Brodgar, and then gradually moves out to the other parts of the country to areas known for mysterious lights and UFOs. Avebury, Stonehenge, Rudston near Bempton in Yorkshire, Anglesey. All these places is where the megalithic culture built their stone circles. And this is no coincidence. This is where we're going next. And all this was on television, so we're still going strong. And hopefully it won't be, as Graham put out on one of his video blogs last week, that he would be dead by the time the 50th anniversary came up. I think, and I hope that he was joking. So with that, I'll say thank you. But before I do, I've got to do the little advert. This is, well, obviously I'm not talking about this. This is my latest book, co-written with Greg Little, Denisovan Origins, inspired by the psychic insights of Debbie. As I said, that's what put us years ahead of our rivals like Graham Hancock or anybody else. The Cygnus Key, obviously Cygnus, a big thing in our life. You know, it's been one of the most important, well, the most important constellation. Now we realise it's part of a much bigger astronomical picture, but it still holds a special flame in our lives. Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of Gods, I'm banned from there now, as I am from Turkey. But I think I managed to say all I needed to say before that time. So all these books are available over there. From the Ashes of Angels, that's what kick-started it off back in 1996, at the same time that Göbekli Tepe was being discovered, again, inspired by psychic work of Debbie, Richard and others. And if you want to come to Egypt with us, I'm the special guest and host on a tour with Ancient Origins to Egypt next February, a couple of weeks, starting at Giza, going all the way down to Abu Simbel, and Nile cruise involved, all the good sites you ever want, private tours to the Great Pyramid where we do a sketch, and the Sphinx and other sites as well. And in a few weeks' time, what is it, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? I'll be at the Origins conference, which these days Hugh does on his own. We used to do it together, but it's just Hugh now. I'll be talking all about the Denisovan origins of human civilization there. And obviously, if you want to contact me, do so through andrewcollins.com and the usual social media. Thank you very much.